Welcome to this presentation on the icon of the Nativity. I'm Father Austin McGirr, who was parish priest in Nativity Parish, Polglass in West Belfast from 1996 until 2006. And during this time, we were building a church and I needed an icon of the Nativity. And I asked Sister Aloysius to write one for me. And you'll hear more about Sister Aloysius in a moment. But the slide you were looking at is the old 15th century icon of the Nativity, which is in the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem. And this icon I was fortunate enough to see in November 2019 when I was on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. And it's just, that icon is placed over the entrance into a side chapel which leads into the crypt where the original cave that's revered as the place of the birth of Jesus. So this icon is over the door, and when I saw it, I was thrilled because of the number of points in it that relate to this icon that Sister Aloysius wrote in 2001. So we'll move on now to the next slide, which shows Sister Aloysius herself after she received her Master in Fine Arts from Yale University. And I think this degree in 1980 started her on a whole journey of religious art. And she lived and worked in Derry. She taught in St Mary's School there in Derry, and later on went to lecture in art in St Mary's University, a teacher training college in Belfast. She was born Bridie McVeigh in Dungiven, 1923, and coincidentally she died on the Feast of the Nativity, Christmas Day 2008. She was an amazing woman. I met her several times. First of all, meeting her to talk about my hope to see a nativity icon in our Nativity Church. I met her in the convent in Pump Street in Derry. And then I didn't meet her again until the work was finished. I'm sure it was 2 or 3 years later. She told me that she'd go to work on this icon of the Nativity as soon as she had a St Bridget done for the parish priest in Kildare, a man I knew, Father Adrian Carberry. And I was delighted to get it, as I said, in about the year 2002. I think that was the year. So I want to thank Jerry Casey, a parishioner of Nativity Parish, for taking these photographs. They're actual photographs of the actual icon. Now, moving on to the icon itself, you can see it there in a stand as it is in the church, held up, and it's a beautiful piece of work. It has used real gold leaf and beautiful colours, very bright, attractive colours, very complex, but hopefully as you listen to this talk you'll get through the complexity of it and see all the symbolism that is there, and also the call that is in the art to us to live our faith more deeply. It's not just a work of art to be admired, but an icon is a window into God himself as he speaks to us. It's an object that can help us to pray, to meditate, to examine our lives, to hold up another standard in front of us that we can live according to. So it's not just a pretty work of art, but it's a work of art that calls us as Christians to be more radical in following Christ. So as usual in iconography, the main event is moved to the foreground, and the main event is Mary, the bearer of Christ, Theotokos. I'll say more about that later. The cave is placed behind rather than around Mary and the child. That's the traditional way we see the nativity scenes. But Mary is at the front, Jesus is behind her, and the animals are behind that again, inside the cave. emphasizing that the cave was used as a stable primarily, and this is the place where Jesus was born. So Christ's birth wasn't just only for us, but for all creation. And we can see around the work of art all the creation, the voiceless animals and the plants. This rhymes very much in tune with Pope Francis's call to us now in the Laudato Si would give us that same outlook that all creation, plants, animals, ourselves, we're all interconnected, we're all part of God's creation, and we should treat it as such. This is God speaking to us through his creation. Now, moving on to the next slide, we can see on the lower left of the icon a despondent Joseph listening to a figure who represents what we might call the voice of unenlightened reason. This figure is accompanied by an unfriendly looking black dog, which gives a clue to the figure's identity. Winston Churchill wrote in his diaries that he was haunted by the black dog of depression. A further clue to the character lies in his depiction. His clothes lack the geometric folds that you can see in all the other figures in the icon. And these geometric folds indicate inner harmony and order. And as well as that, the figure is shown in profile. He's the only figure shown like this. Now, this leads us to see that he's not wrapped in inner harmony, and he's also untruthful in the way he presents himself. You only see half of his face in a way. All the other figures show their full face, represent both eyes, giving you a full revelation of themselves. And this figure is shown as if unwilling to disclose his true personality. Now back to Joseph again. We can only wonder what is going on in his head, why he has got his head down, supported by his hand. He's at the ends of the picture because his part in the whole conception and birth of Jesus is very peripheral. In our tradition, we call him the foster father of Jesus. Another explanation might be that he can't quite believe what he's just experienced. He's listened to angels. He knows that this child of his is a miraculous child, born of the Holy Spirit and Jesus and the Virgin. But still, it's hard when it actually happens to really accept this. The woman has given birth to a child just as women have been doing since Eve. Joseph has witnessed that birth, and there's nothing different about it except the circumstances in the cave, first of all, where the animals are kept in cold weather. Joseph has had his dreams, he's heard the angelic voices, he's been reassured in a variety of ways that the child born of Mary is the awaited one, the anointed God's son, and that Mary was the mother of God. But still, belief comes hard. The labour of giving birth is arduous, as we see in Mary's reclining figure. And so also is the labour to believe. Mary has completed this stage of her struggle, but Joseph still grapples with his. And there is something about the way Mary turns away from her son and looks as a loving wife towards her husband. Jesus, although he is an infant, is the Lord, the giver of life. He looks a strong figure as he lies in his tomb stroke cradle. But her compassionate, affectionate attention is on Joseph, weakened by his struggle. So those who walk in the valley of the shadow of death are usually unaware of the compassionate gaze of our mother on them. In this look, Our Lady offers compassion, and she offers her prayers to all who struggle with questions and doubts of faith. They are not alone. Even the black dog turns in retreat, knowing that Joseph is beyond temptation. Dogs are good judges of the human character. The next slide then, just a bigger picture of showing Mary's labour over, and we see her reclining figure, and she's pointing out to Joseph, the child, and her attention is on him. In other words, she's reaching out a hand to both. The next slide again, we're still in the bottom left-hand corner. That's a close-up of the black dog in retreat, sort of running away, scared, knowing that Joseph is beyond temptation. As somebody says, away to hell. The next slide focuses on the heart of the icon. The theme of this oppression is not only in Joseph's face. We can look at the black of the cave of Christ's birth in the centre of the icon, and that's the only part of the art that uses the colour black. And it represents all human disbelief, all fear, all hopelessness. In the cave of our despair, Christ, the Son of Truth, enters history, having been clothed in flesh in Mary's body. It's just as the evangelist John said at the beginning of his gospel, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness cannot overcome it. Great contrast there in the art between the whiteness of the Christ figure and the blackness of the cave. The next slide shows the most prominent figure in the icon, Our Lady, or Theotokos, as the Greeks call her, the God-bearer. That term was given to her at the Council of Ephesus in the 4th century. So Mary is framed by a red blanket, the colour of life, red, the colour of life, the colour of blood. Her hands reach out for Joseph in matrimonial concern and point him to the source of life, her son Jesus. Come to me, all you who labour and are overburdened, and I will give you rest. So the next slide is a close-up on the face of Mary. And her titles are written in Cyrillic script. That's the script that Greeks used. It's a wee bit different from the modern Greek. And the figures, the letters are M, R, and beneath that TH, U. 4 letters. TH is 1 letter and U. So that's abbreviation for Mater Theou, the Mother of God. So she's always represented like that, given her titles, and she's also always adorned in iconography by 3 stars, signs of her triple virginity, before, during, and after her pregnancy. Her quiet but wholehearted assent to the invitation brought to her by the Archangel Gabriel has led her to Bethlehem, making a cave at the edge of a peasant village the centre of the universe. So the next slide comes out a bit from the picture. He who was distant has now come near, first filling her body, now visible in the flesh. Mary is depicted as recumbent, a position that indicates the humanity of the Christ child. The next slide then shows the whole icon again. I'll just say a wee word about icons in general. Contemplating this image leads us to understand and wonder more deeply at our own redemption. As the deer yearns for running streams, so my soul is thirsting for you, my God. And you can see the deer on the right-hand side of the picture, drinking from the running streams. In praying before an icon, we draw deeply from the wells of salvation. Every part of an icon has a meaning. Every colour, every image, every material used. It all means something. First of all, the icon is painted on wood, recalling the wood of the cross. The wood is then covered with linen, recalling the linen which wrapped the body of Christ before it was laid in the tomb. Then layers of alabaster are applied to this surface, and the pigments used are all directly from the earth. These pigments are mixed with egg yolk and wine vinegar to make the paint, the egg being a symbol of the resurrection. The iconographer does not sign the work in the manner of Western artists, just as no one would take credit for a prayer. Now, of course, I got all that from Sister Aloysius, of course, who didn't sign this icon or even sign the text that describes what the icon means. As she says, no one would take credit for a prayer. And she said this in a letter to me when she took on the work of doing this icon. She says, without the Feast of the Nativity, there would be no icons. In the Nativity, we have the first icon, the first image of Christ. Through the writings of St. Luke in his Gospel, we have the image of Christ the Saviour, born in powerlessness and poverty, first known to the shepherds and later to the wise men in his Gospels. This message is not just for Christmas, it is for every day if we are to appreciate the grace of God at work in our lives. And this traditional icon of the Nativity comes from the 15th century, attributed to Rublev, and still has a message for our modern world, which Sister Aloysius has written into her recent work for Nativity Parish, Polglass, this icon we're looking at. The Nativity icon is in a sharp contrast to the sentimental imagery we're used to in Western Christmas art. In the icon, there's no charming Bethlehem bathed with the light of the Nativity star, but only a rugged mountain with a few plants. The austere mountain suggests a hard, unwelcoming world in which survival is the real battle, the world since our expulsion from paradise. Through the mercy of God, the mountain is stepped to make ascent to the heights possible, to the dwelling place of God the Most High. Each step is blessed with light. Christ enters our world as it is, to restore unity to creation, to lead us from exile into your heavenly kingdom. And that's from the Christmas preface, number 2. He is the light in the darkness. In the next slide, we see a close-up of the donkey and the ox beside the place where Jesus is. And they represent all creatures, great and small. All creatures endangered, punished, and exploited by human beings. They too are victims of the fall. Christ's nativity is for them as well as for us. Going on to the next slide, at the top of the icon there's a ray of divine light that connects heaven with the baby. It's the sword of sorrow which Simeon prophesied would pierce the heart of Mary that we have in Luke's Gospel, chapter 2. The sword is also the tree of victory, the cross. This ray of light is also connected with the star that led the Magi to the cave. Christ is the light of the world, and this too is suggested by the ray connecting heaven to the manger. Today in him a new light has dawned upon the world. This is what the church sings on Christmas in the third preface. The next slide then we're back to Christ's body wrapped in swaddling clothes. Now, I always wondered what swaddling clothes were. I'd only heard the past couple of years that lambs that were newborn would have been wrapped like this. Not all lambs, but some of them. And their limbs were wrapped to keep them straight, because they were the lambs that were going to be set aside for sacrifice in the ancient rituals of the Jewish people. So they were wrapped tightly in order to keep them straight and perfect for sacrifice. So there's a real allusion there to Jesus being prepared for sacrifice by the tightness of the swaddling clothes. There's also a kind of an allusion here to Lazarus being bound up in his tomb and raised by Christ. And Christ says, unbind him, let him go free. Now the manger in this icon looks very like a coffin. In this way the icon links birth and death. This is why Christ was born, to die for us. The poet Rilke says that we bear our death within us from the moment of birth. So the icon of the Nativity says the same. Our life is one piece, and its length is of much less importance than its purity and its truthfulness. Around the image of Christ are the Greek characters giving his name, a bit like we had with Mary earlier. Jesus Christ is his name, and in the halo, the Greek letters Ha, O, and N, which means I am who am. The name of God, the name that God gave of himself to Moses on Mount Sinai, thus presenting Jesus as truly God and truly man. Next slide shows the angels who are worshipping God become man. Though we ourselves are rarely aware of the presence of angels, they are deeply enmeshed in our history, and we know some of them by name. This momentous event is for them as well as us. In Sister Aloysius's work, the angels on the left are a choir praising God. So they're holding their hands up, praising God. And those on the right are engaged in ministry. Their hands are covered in reverence for the Sacred One to whom they minister. One of the angels on the right leans down to announce the good news to the shepherds. And the next slide shows that in close-up. So moving on then to the next slide, we see a shepherd minding his sheep. This is the man who's heard the good news from the angel. There have been shepherds throughout history, and it has in fact been the simple people who have been most uncompromising in their response to the gospel, who have not buried God in footnotes. Not the wise men, but the shepherds were permitted to hear the choir of angels singing God's praise. They are close to the cave, sharing the poverty and the powerlessness of Christ. They come as they are, in their working clothes, with the tools of their trade, their sheep and their music. In the next slide, we see some wise men. Traditionally, in cribs, we have 3 wise men, although 3 wasn't mentioned in the scriptures at all. But it's a tradition. Now, their close attention to activity in the heavens made them come on pilgrimage to pay homage to a king who belongs not to one people, but to all people, not to one age, but to all ages. They represent the world beyond Judaism. They are represented as small figures because they are far away from the nativity scene. They are in complete contrast to the shepherds who are close. Their journey is longer and more arduous. They come on horseback, a sign of power, and come dressed in their finery as kings. Their learning and their power are no advantage. On the bottom right of the icon, this next slide, the bottom right, there's 2 midwives washing the newborn infant Jesus. The detail is based on apocryphal texts concerning Joseph's arrangements for the birth. And you remember in the Old Testament, the book of Exodus, the disobedience of the midwives to the Egyptian Pharaoh enabled Moses not to be murdered at birth with all the other children of the Jewish people, but grew to be one to lead his people from slavery to freedom. Now Moses' name translates as "I drew you out," which could be an allusion to his own being drawn out of the water. I remember he was in a basket and the basket floated down and Pharaoh's daughter lifted him out from the water in this basket. But it's also the way that Moses lifted out, he drew out his people, he led them out from slavery in Egypt into freedom. And of course, Moses prefigures Jesus, who leads us out from sin and death to the glorious freedom of the children of God. So in the Nativity icon, the midwife's presence has another important function. They underscore Christ's full participation in human nature. So like any wee baby boy, he had to have his bath. The next slide is an overall view of the icon. The iconic portrayal of Christ's birth is not without radical social implications. Christ's birth occurred where it did, as we are told by Matthew, because there was no room in the inn. He who welcomes all is himself unwelcome. From the first moment, he is something like a refugee, and indeed he soon will be in the very strict sense of the word. He will be a refugee in Egypt with Mary and Joseph at a safe distance from the murderous Herod. Later in life, he will say to his followers, revealing the criteria for salvation, "I was homeless and you took me in." We are saved not by our achievements, but by our participation in the mercy of God, God's hospitality. If we turn our backs on the homeless and those without the necessities of life, we will end up with nothing more than ideas and slogans and be lost in the icon's starless cave. Now, in reading that, I can hear Sister Aloysius' own vocation as a mercy sister. This next slide, we return at the end to the 2 figures at the heart of the icon. Mary, fulfilling Eve's destiny, has given birth to Jesus Christ, a child who is God incarnate a child in whom each of us finds our true self, a child who is the measure of all things. This is not the Messiah the Jews of those days expected, or the God we Christians of the modern world were expecting either. God, whom we often refer to as Almighty, reveals himself in poverty and vulnerability. Christmas is a revelation of the self-emptying love of God. And thank you for your kind attention, and may God bless all your efforts to understand his ways and to live his truth.